for you. If your paddocks are almost flat, a radial arm design such as the SDX case, such as the John Deere 1890, whatever, are going to work fine for you. If you're in a controlled traffic situation and you've got depressions where your controlled traffic tracks are, you may not see enough ability for the unit to descend down, and it may take some aftermarket modifications. So parallel linkage single disc openers are obviously the future. The only weakness with the single discs, the John Deere and the case, and they're both good machines. The case is quite a bit heavier than the John Deere, but it has a bigger blade. The John Deere runs an 18-inch blade, which I like. The case is a 22.5-inch blade, which is obviously a lot bigger. It lasts a lot longer, but it takes a lot more down pressure to push a bigger blade, obviously, into the ground. The other limitation with the John Deere and the case is that the gauge wheel is obviously positively linked to the disc, which some perceive as a positive, but if you're planting cereals into sorghum or cereals into corn or a field that's not perfectly flat or you've got rocks or any of the above, if that gauge wheel climbs over a rock or a divot or whatever it is, it's going to raise that disc out of the ground, causing inconsistent seeding depth. Now, a lot of you will say, well, why doesn't that happen on a corn planter? Well, on a corn planter, you've got two gauge wheels either side. You have what you call equalizers. So if one gauge wheel goes up, it forces the other one down. Okay, so a corn planter is much better able to cope or handle minor surface irregularities compared to a disc seeder with a rigidly mounted gauge wheel alongside the disc. Okay. Some of the newer technologies, this is a good one. This is a Bourgault 3710. Hopefully you'll get to see this at some of the events. I think it's going to be at AgQuip. It's going to be at 2 or 3 other events. We saw one the other day in Moree. So there are some over here being used at the shows. It's a 20.5-inch disc. The novelty or the two big benefits of this particular seeder, in my opinion, number one, perhaps you can see it, is obviously a parallel linkage. You've got about 14 inches of top to bottom travel at which the down pressure is consistent within the range of travel hydraulically. That's a big positive. The radial arm design, such as what you got on a Case SDX or the John Deere, if your unit descends down, you start losing spring pressure, you lose the ability to cut through residue into the soil. So unless you've got an almost perfectly flat, I say almost, as long as if you've got a relatively flat field, they'll work fine. But if you've got controlled traffic tracks, depressions, you're going to have challenges with the radial arms. So then the parallel linkage designs like this really start to kick in. The other big plus of this, which is a really good plus, is this is your gauge wheel, just like what's on the John Deere and the case. This is your closing wheel, not the same as what's on a John Deere and a case. But the gauge wheel and the closing wheel is pivoted right here. So you've got a walk-in tandem arrangement on a single disc seeder. So if you can visualize a rock under the gauge wheel will lift, put more pressure on the closing system, and it won't have a big impact on seeding depth. So I'm not saying it completely separates, they're obviously still connected, but it gives you the ability for the disc opener to remain engaged in the soil as the gauge wheel climbs over a rock, a piece of residue, whatever. Okay? Can I get you to show the video? And it's not a high quality video. It was at a farm show 2 or 3 years ago. They were doing some demonstrations. So it's going to scroll 4 or 5 times. I'm going to explain a few things that are going on. But number one, you got walking tandem wheels. So on the main frame, you got walking tandems, which I think is a huge plus if you've got any irregularities in the field whatsoever. It maintains a relatively consistent frame, which is obviously an important part. You've then got, as the video keeps scrolling, you've then got the ability for the gauge wheel to move independently to the disc. And there's a wheel track or a depression, something, I don't know where it is, about here maybe. If you follow it through, about here, you can see that the gauge wheel dips down and then the closing wheel dips down, but the disc opener remains engaged in the ground. Okay? So there's some things going on here. I guess in my opinion, this is one of the more advanced single disc seeders. It's on 7.5-inch spacing. You've got the ability to do mid-row banding at the front if you want to put down some additional potash, maybe a little mid-row banded nitrogen. But you've got the ability that you've got good depth control, very consistent depth control, and the ability to mid-row band nutrients should you wish to. Okay, it's a relatively heavy machine also, so there's some good soil and residue cutting characteristics. Thank you. You can put it back to the slides if you would. So one of the opportunities, I'm not sure how well this photograph shows it, but this is a photograph looking right behind the disc opener. They are cast in the disc opener slightly to an angle. You've seen the Barton disc opener that entered the soil with a positive rake angle, which helps pull the opener into the ground and reduces the amount of vertical force required to push it into the ground. It comes at the cost of more soil disturbance. So the more you rake or roll the disc opener over to achieve better soil penetration, the more opposing soil forces there's going to be, and the more soil disturbance that you're going to get. There's not nearly the amount of rake angle as what there is on a Barton, but there's still more than what there is on a Case or a John Deere. We've not found the soil disturbance to be excessive. The gauge wheel tends to hold it in place, but again, I'm not here to sell equipment. I don't sell these. I'm just here to give you some ideas and some things to be looking for when you're selecting a seeder, okay? So we're doing inter-row seeding like a lot of you guys are too. This is wheat going right back into wheat stubble in Kansas. This is 10-inch rows going right back in the middle with RTK on a cat, inter-row seeding on 10-inch spacing. The good thing about a lot of the single-disc machines, especially when you get 7.5-inch rows, you have the ability to raise up the rear rank, so you can plant lentils or canola if you wish on 15-inch rows. So you have the flexibility to do that. Okay, this is inter-row seeding on 7.5-inch spacing, so 7.5-inch wheat back into wheat again in this particular example. Let me skip over that for reason of time. Most of the newer single-disc seeders are running narrower gauge wheels. They're 2.5 or 3 inches wide. It gives you the ability to run a disc and a gauge wheel down narrow rows without running down the residue. Okay, so obviously the big benefit of single-disc seeders is you're creating a very small amount of surface soil disturbance. Okay, I'm sure, or at least I'm hoping that a lot of you have heard Dwayne Beck speak. If you haven't, you need to hear him speak. He's a huge advocate of no-till and single-disc seeding back in the States. He has a huge amount of work that correlates soil disturbance against weed control. And it's almost worth listening or getting online and looking at some of his presentations. But he's got a lot of work that shows seeding systems that disturb a lot of ground are obviously having significantly higher weed densities compared to just no-till seeding with a single-disc seeder that creates almost no soil disturbance at all. So just by leaving a mat of residue on the soil surface, hopefully evenly distributed residue on the soil surface, you're cutting back significantly on weed growth. You've then got the benefit, in my opinion, of the narrower rows, canopying faster to help shade out some of the weeds, which again I believe is positive from a point of view of weed control. Okay? Let me see how much more time I've got. For those of you that have got summer crops, this is another producer I work with doing inter-row sowing. This is on 10-inch spacing, which would be the widest wheat spacing I work with. In this example, we're planting corn on 30-inch rows, coming back with 10-inch spacing. You can do the same on 7.5, but using some of the technologies that I've already mentioned, we're able to position wheat rows between corn rows. So again, corn rows positioned here, 30-inch rows, then we've got 3 10-inch rows between them. So we're completely avoiding the corn rows, leaving all of the residue intact, and planting the wheat rows between the corn rows. Okay? I'll get into that maybe this afternoon. Basically what I'm going to do now is conclude and roll over to some questions. They've got me down for another, I believe, 40 minutes, perhaps 30 or 40 minutes this afternoon. I've got some more slides that are more specific to seeding and seeding technologies. Okay? What I'm also going to do this afternoon is make it more of an interactive session. I think I've got a half-size group, so we're going to probably try and interact a lot more, get some of your experiences, get some questions, and I'll start answering them. So